Speakers, Shauna Corr, an investigative journalist with RTE, BBC, and Irish Independent, and resident journalist at the UCD Earth Institute, plus Phoebe Cooke and Brigitte Wear from DeSmog, an international journalism agency that tackles climate misinformation. And together they'll share tips on uncovering stories, verifying facts, communicating complex environmental issues with clarity and impact. Firstly, I want to give a quick overview of the programme, the four-step methodology, our timeline for the year ahead, the resources and tools that we have available to you. Just a quick note, this webinar is being recorded for those who are unable to attend live, and we will share it afterwards and the slides too. Please post any comments or questions into the chat as you go, and we'll go through them at the end where we will have time for Q&A. So YRE is run by the Foundation of Environmental Education based in Copenhagen, which you may know is also the parent body for Green Campus, Green Schools and the Blue Flag programme. We celebrated 30 years of the programme last year, and it's now active in 42 countries and has over 495,393 young reporters. It fulfills step 6, informing and involving for green schools and green campuses. And the essence of the programme is to encourage students to investigate a specific environmental issue in their community, propose solutions, and articulate findings through the media of writing, photography, or video. The programme enhances communication skills, citizenship skills, individual initiative, teamwork, critical analysis, social responsibility, and leadership abilities. YRE is very much focused on solutions journalism, so we encourage you to look at what solutions exist, how effective are they, and what you can do individually or collectively in our communities to contribute to positive change. The YRE process is underpinned by a simple, tested four-step methodology. Firstly, identifying an issue in your locality. This could be on school, on campus, at home, or even at a city, regional, and national level. Secondly, research a solution. Again, the scope is broad. This can be through desktop analysis, data collection, quantitative or qualitative in the form of interviews, essentially your hypothesis testing stage. And the purpose of highlighting these two initial steps is to focus on the importance of critical analysis and rigor in the journalistic process. The third step involves creation of an article, video, photographic work or podcast that communicates these ideas. And the final step is dissemination, which is a really important aspect that can take place in the form of your campus or school bulletins, newspapers, social media groups and forums, local media, but even as widespread as RTE. It's part of the judging process, so tracking metrics used here will count for marks in the competition, and we'll be doing our part here to promote your entries via social media as well as our exposure page, which is designed specifically to highlight journalistic content. Have a look at our website and familiarize yourselves with each of the different categories that you can enter. We had one student last year enter all three, so there are no limits, and we'll have additional webinars throughout the year to cover photo and video journalism. We're here to help you develop the skills and acquire the knowledge to create winning entries. The website has loads of useful advice about the competition, judging criteria, tips on crafting articles and videos, as well as photography. The international website's really good as well for video tutorials and webinars and look at best practices. The FEE Academy, which I'll send links to, also has short courses on journalism. For example, there's storytelling for climate action, which is about 2 to 3 hours long, and then there's specific ones on videography and photography as well. We also have a resource section, and I've emailed you a copy of our new media literacy lesson plan with misinformation rife both on social media and in political discourse. It's really important that we're able to combat any misinformation that we encounter online, and we'll delve into this further today. YRE International also has a media literacy recorded webinar, which Shout Out UK, which is really informative too, and I'll share the links for this too. We have put together top 10 tips for avoiding disinformation. I won't go into it now, but we will share it with you afterwards. The next webinar is going to take place end of November, early December, so keep an eye on our socials for dates on this. The deadline for the competition will be the end of March with an award ceremony in May. There is a prize fund of €2,000 cumulatively, so it's a great incentive to get involved. You can enter as an individual or a group there's no limits, but just be mindful that the prize will be split between the winners and runners up. The judges look for evidence of critical thinking and originality in entries. Points are also awarded for dissemination, so it's really important to include evidence of this with your entries. For the national competition guidelines, terms and conditions, the best place to keep an eye on it is the wireireland.org, where you can see criteria in more detail. I will email this on to you, but there's certain criteria for each of the different categories. So for example, with your article, it would be 1,000 words or less. It must have a title and maybe 3 attaching images. We'll also be evaluating the sources used, your link from the local issue to the global, link to SDGs, and that you have an intro, a body, and conclusion. We'll also be looking out for that you've answered the who, the what, the where, the why, the when, and the how. So do carefully read over this before submitting. And again, I will send this out to you after this webinar. For inspiration, have a look at our exposure platform. This provides examples of winning entries, both Ireland and for internationally as well. Exposure is a tool which acts to quickly and easily turn your content into shareable professional pieces for an online audience. We will be publishing and sharing content throughout the year as it arises, and it gives you that professional platform then to share your work. As you can see, YRE gets a lot of media coverage, so it gives you great opportunities. I am going to now hand you over to my colleague Valerie to say a few words. She's communications coordinator at Antashka, and she has an extensive background in print journalism as well, including design editor of the Irish Independent. She's worked for the Sunday Independent, the Sunday Business Post, and Finance Magazine, amongst others. So over to you, Valerie.
Hi, yeah, this is great. I'm really excited about today's webinar. I won't take up much of your time because I think it's great to hear from Phoebe and Brigitte and Shauna. So, what is journalism? Even if we don't notice it always, journalism shapes how we understand the world around us. Basically, it's about finding out what's happening, checking the facts, and sharing that information with the public. Journalists are the people who go out, ask those questions, research the stories, and then tell us what they've learned. There's lots of different ways they do that between online platforms and much older forms of media. So there's different types of journalism. They include news reporting, which is daily events like elections, disasters, and sports, even feature stories, which focus more on people and communities, and more about sharing experiences and breaking news, and investigative journalism, which digs deeper, like uncovering corruption or hidden problems. Journalism isn't just about telling stories. It's often called the fourth estate, meaning it's like a fourth pillar of democracy. While governments make and enforce laws, journalism keeps an eye on those in power. Journalists ask tough questions, check facts, and make sure the public knows what's really going on. So why does journalism matter? First, it keeps us informed. We make decisions, big or small, based on the information that we get. Whether it's about politics, climate change, or local news, journalism gives us the facts we need to understand the world and to make better choices. Second, it holds people accountable. If a politician lies, a company pollutes, or something unfair happens, journalists can investigate and bring it to light. That pressure can lead to real change. Third, journalism gives people a voice. It highlights issues that might otherwise be ignored, like the struggles of certain communities, or social problems that need attention. And fourth, it connects us. News and stories help us understand different people, cultures, and perspectives. It reminds us that the world is bigger than just our own lives. And of course, journalism isn't perfect. It can contain bias and sometimes serve hidden agendas. So one big problem is misinformation. Fake news can spread fast, especially online. That's why it's important to pay attention to where we get our news from. We all need to be media literate. Basically, the skill to question, double check, and not believe everything at first glance. Journalism informs us, it protects democracy, it gives people a voice, and connects society. A strong, free press is a sign of a healthy society and is something worth paying attention to. And now, in the world of AI, is another challenge to how we take in information. So I think it's really important to be able to look at the world and report. So I think it's a very exciting career, and this is a great competition to have a go. That's me.
Thanks, Valerie. So next up, we have Shauna Corr, investigative journalist, and resident journalist at UCD Earth Institute. So she continues to shine a light on environmental issues. So yeah, over to you, Shauna.
Apologies, I'm muted. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. So I thought I'd just really start off with telling you a little bit about me. When I started out in journalism, I really didn't think about the environment. I was a vegetarian from a teenage years, so obviously at that point cared a little bit about animals. But for me, the real interest in environment peaked as I was working in everyday news, covering issues within my community, and realized that this was a sector that was very, very much sort of underreported and played fiddle, second fiddle to just about everything else. So, setting out as a young journalist, I kind of always had that in my back, in my rear view mirror and in the background, where I was seeing issues that were sort of coming to the fore within my community in terms of sand extraction from Lough Neagh. I know that that's now been approved, but for a long time I wrote about the issues around that, and then that led me into an issue of a massive gold mine that an American company would like to build in County Tyrone. I could see issues with waste, environmental crimes, and then as I dug a little bit deeper, massive planning oversight sometimes within the councils, local authorities, even within government itself. And then climate crisis really, really started to take off. And I suppose all of that really led me down the investigations path and away from everyday sort of news. So that's where I started out. And I think you guys you've already got a massive interest in this. So at this stage of your career or your young lives, you're already way ahead of where I was in my 20s when I was beginning out on this path. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. So from working in local press, then I moved on to working on a daily newspaper in the north. So that would be the Daily Mirror in Northern Ireland, and Belfast Live was the online version of that. And even though I was reporting on crimes, everything else, doing all of those bits in the background, I got the lovely job of covering health while COVID kicked off. Did a bit about investigation, and then our company really started to see that environment stories were bedding in, and that they might actually need somebody up front and center on this. And because I've been doing a column called The Earth's Core on that for about a year at this stage, they asked me to sort of take over the whole of the island. So I would take over reporting on the environment in the Republic of Ireland as well as Northern Ireland. And that in itself was a huge learning curve. Obviously, two governments, a lot to think about. Obviously, it's split up now and we've got UK and Europe, but you've got to then have an eye on all of those issues. But to bring it back to sort of the basics for you, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the story is. I think four things that you really need to be able to bring to the fore are your contacts. They are the most important thing that any young journalist, any old journalist, any journalist at all who's worth their salt will have a good contacts book. And that takes time to build up. And with that, you'll also, with keeping in touch with those contacts, meeting people on the ground, talking to them, pick up the phone, go meet them for a coffee. Then you grow that trust and relationship, and they'll come to you with information that could be the little spark that might lead to a bigger investigation into some issue, which has happened to me numerous times throughout my career. And then the big one is investigation, and that's really scratching beneath the surface of the day-to-day news. We've all seen the reports from Middleton, which flooded, and that's the daily news reporter's job. But for an environment reporter, an environment correspondent, or an investigative reporter, then you take those stories, you go off and you have a little bit of a deeper dive, get the experts in, speak to academics, what analysis have they done of this, and bring all that together. And then your output is your content. And like Claire had said before, that can come in the form of newsletters, it can come in the form of newspaper reports. There's amazing tools out there now if you don't want to feed in directly to, the media, as people call it. Substack is an amazing platform. Young people could be doing that right now, getting up getting out there, setting up your own Substack, looking really hyper local within your community and thinking, what are the issues that matter to people, say within Monaghan as opposed to Dublin, you know, different things like that. So it's how you're then putting out your content. And as journalists, we don't just use what goes into the newspapers if we're writing for a specific publication. It's online, it's websites, it's what's going on your social media. TikTok's an amazing, amazing tool for journalists, you know, to get really, really complex issues over really, really quickly to new audiences and younger audiences. So those sorts of like basic kind of soft skills, I would say, are really, really important in this role. And that sort of brings me to what you should think about, where your ideas come from for stories. Sorry, Claire, could I get the next slide? Yeah, so those skills are just the starting point. But you need to learn your subject. You need to read as much as you can get your hands on, be aware of what everybody's doing within that area. Have a read of the different publications. It could be the Indo, it could be the Irish Times, it could be the Daily Mirror, the different websites that are out there. And also, you know, there could be really good people online making, you know, waves within the TikTok space or within the social media space, magazines. You can get all of that information from all over the place. Also government, you know, they've got online resources, they've got rundowns of different committee meetings on councils. You can listen into all of that. That would all give you ideas for stories as well. But then you also need to pick up the phone. And something that I've noticed, and this might make me sound really old because let's face it, I am getting on in life a little bit, but for younger people, I think one skill that you could really focus on and hone in on is learning to speak to people face to face, because I noticed while I was in my daily newsroom, a lot of the young reporters coming in really, really struggled to make phone calls in front of people, to have those chats and those conversations. If you're nervous about speaking to people on the phone, go meet them for a coffee, make it somewhere nice and cozy that you can feel a little bit more comfortable, because it's those face-to-face relationships, those interactions that are going to get you more from a story and more feeling. You'll be able to initiate your gut, you know, talk to people face to face. You can see the thoughts that are going across their face and everything else. Because let's face it, if you go down this route and you take on this career, you're going to have sometimes to face some very powerful people. That could be the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach. It could be if you're heading off to a COP conference, if that's the future you see for yourself, you could be standing up against world leaders and questioning the decisions that they're making in terms of the climate crisis. And, you know, I've had that experience. And even within those rooms, believe it or not, some of the world's best journalists get nervous and they shake a little bit with the microphone in their hand when they're questioning the president of COP as to why he's doing oil and gas deals while, you know, they're supposed to be talking about how they're reducing the climate's emissions. So those day-to-day meetings with people, those face-to-face interactions will help you build that confidence within yourself, and also help you build really, really important relationships, because the biggest part of this job is having the contacts, knowing people to go to. I'm working on a particular story about climate at the moment, and I need a very particular thing, but I can pick up the phone to maybe 10 people. And if that person doesn't know, they can pinpoint me on to another one and another one. But when that trust's there, then they'll, you know, help you to get where you need to be with whatever story it is. Could I have the next slide, please, Claire? Thank you. This and a terrible picture of me. I absolutely hate it, but I thought it was important to put in because, like I said, at COP29 in Baku, I was sitting in the press conference room and I was becoming more and more and more frustrated. You had journalists from CNN, the New York Times, the Guardian, all these massive newspapers around the world. And at conferences like that, it can be quite difficult for journalists. And I don't, you know, that's something that maybe a lot of people wouldn't really be aware of. So you're there to do a job. I was there reporting for the Irish Mirror and the Irish Daily Star, and this was my fourth conference. So I kind of knew the lay of the land and how busy it was and everything else. But when I went into that, I had all these like ideas in the back of my mind on the things that I wanted to report, but I'm always mindful that I need to make this relevant for people in Ireland. But one thing I couldn't get over was the press conferences were sort of taken over. And this is where a free press comes in Baku, the Azerbaijani press and media that were on the ground seemed to be at every single press conference be given the first 5 or 6 questions to ask really soft, ridiculous questions like, how are the other countries finding our hospitality, or how's everybody getting on with this? But there were no hardball questions on where the climate talks were going. Why was Azerbaijan, which, believe it or not, was the first country in the world to ever dig oil out of the ground, doing oil and gas deals with countries across Europe? No one had asked that question. And I was becoming more and more frustrated. So I stuck my hand up at the end of the press conference and I asked the president of COP that question. I was nervous, but you know, you've got to do what you've got to do. Looking around that room, I was thinking, why is no one asking this question? I was like, well, I'm a reporter, I should ask it. So I did. And he just stared at me for 2 minutes, but it made, you know, it made the headlines in different publications, and we were able to do a big story then off the back of that. I'll not be answering that, you know, a good old spin on, you know, the Irish words of OIL, I'll not be answering that. But it's those sorts of scenarios then that you get to hold power to account. And you might not get the answers that you want, but the very fact that they know that you're in the room and you're questioning what's going on, that's why we're called the fourth estate, as Valerie had said. So yeah, it's just about being there. It's about being in the room. It's about being able to ask the hard questions. And one thing that I would always come back to is that there is no such thing as a stupid question, because just because you don't know the answer to something doesn't mean that you shouldn't ask it. You know, you might go into press conferences with different ministers, or you might have a particular idea for a story in mind, and think, has someone done this before? And that's where the reading and the background and everything else comes in. But go into everything with an open mind and ask as many questions as you can, because you'll never know what sort of path that leads you down. Could I have the next slide, please, Claire? Thank you. So this was Baku, and this comes back to also thinking outside the box. So there were stories from the conference, and I was really lucky in that we had a lot of support from the Global Ireland Fund to help me to be there at that conference for 2 weeks while there were talks going on inside COP29 in Baku. When I realized that this was the first country where oil was dug out of the ground, I thought there must be still some oil being dug out of the ground somewhere. So I decided to take a day out of the conference, hire a driver, and he was able to then take me around and show me where all the oil rigs were still literally drilling oil out of the ground as this conference on climate and how we're going to reduce the world's emissions is going on. And you could, from the oil rigs where we were standing, you could see the conference venue just in the distance, and that really blew my mind. But so on the one hand, you're going there to report on the conference, but it sort of helps to sometimes take a step back and think, what are the other stories around this issue? Is there, you know, it was complete hypocrisy, really. You know, here's Baku leading the world's climate conference to talk about how we're going to drive down emissions, and everywhere around that conference venue, they'd done their very best to hide all of these oil rigs, to cover over their big oil tankers with stickers of wind turbines and all the rest of it. So we were able then to cover stories where we were highlighting that hypocrisy. You know, ask the question, is this conference really doing what it should be? Or are we putting this responsibility in the hands of the right countries when it comes down to it? And then even within that, you've got a lot of activists on the ground, and it's always really important to make those sorts of contacts as well. So while on the one hand you could be questioning governments, you've got to give a voice to people that maybe don't necessarily have one. So building those contacts is hugely, hugely important. And when that trust is there, they will always come back to you in the future and say, oh, I've got an update on that story that I was working on. And that could be, if we're looking back to what's happening here in Ireland, COP is one thing, but what's happening here on the ground, there's a lot of stuff going on at all times. And honestly, there probably aren't enough environment reporters in the world to cover it all and do it justice, but we just sort of take over and do what we can. Could I have the next slide, please, Claire? So with that in mind, I've just put together a couple of headlines of different issues that I've kind of reported down through the years, and some of these go back to COP, you know, where you've got different ministers. And Eamon Ryan was very good. We got very good access to him where he was saying it's pay up time. You know, the polluters have to pay at COP. And we still see that rhetoric today. Obviously, the Greens aren't now in power in government. And that has, it seems, made a difference. We saw that with the last budget when that was all rolled out, and they've kind of robbed some of the climate chest to do other things. But when you're thinking about environment across the spectrum, climate is one thing. So a lot of my work has been done on that, but it should be also looking at the impacts at home. So we've got at home, we've got issues like Lough Neagh, which I know isn't such a big issue for the Republic, but the Republic and a couple of the county borders are partly responsible for that catastrophe, because you've got a lot of sort of food processing and agri-foods in Monaghan and Cavan that would be feeding into the Lough Neagh basin. So the pollution that's happening there has fed into the issues on Lough Neagh. And we've got issues like flooding. So you could look at flooding around different communities, issues like that. Time to wave goodbye to our homes. We've got certain flood zones around the country, and there is a lot more work to be done on that. So it's just about really widening your mind, looking around you. And I suppose that's where I always come back to. I think about the issues that then sort of matter to me. Am I running out of time, Claire?
No, you're okay.
Okay. Could I have the next slide, please?
Yeah. Oh.
So those stories really, they're sort of reporting on issues as they happen, but they only scratch the surface. And that brings me to my point on why we need investigations. So it could be, these are sort of some of the investigations that I worked on within Ireland while I worked for the Irish Mirror and the Irish Daily Star. So Ahana Shalumina absolutely blew my mind when I came across this story. I'd gone down to North Kerry and I'd seen that on the ground, but the company wanted to expand that. And as you can see from that picture, which really, really speaks volumes, that's the Shannon right there. And then you've got this huge, huge dumping ground for this aluminium, basically bauxite refining factory, which is right beside the River Shannon. So I covered that story, brought new information to the fore. And while that's been around for 20 years, there can always be new sorts of angles to kind of get you into a story, to tease out what's going on in the local area, what local feelings are. Then I had started looking at maybe, I don't know, 2-3 years back about the impact of unweaned calves going on really, really long journeys. And that sort of came from a relationship with Compassion and World Farming and Eyes on Animals, and, you know, activists working within Ireland that saw that there was this major issue with the milk cap being lifted in Ireland. We had this massive amounts of milk. And with every cow, if you think every cow has to have a calf to be able to keep producing milk every single year. So where do all these calves go? So we were looking at the question, and then we realized that these calves, some of them still relying on milk, could be as young as 14 days old, were being packed up onto lorries from up and down the country, all over the place, and sent on all these long journeys overseas. And off the back of that reporting, then the RTE then did a bit of an investigation that went on the television, and that won awards. And I was sort of thinking afterwards, maybe I should have stuck a few of my stories into the Irish Journalism Awards, but didn't. I always forget to do that. But then other investigations led me down to ask about peat, planting on peat. You know, when Quailcha's going in, planting these, they've got these massive forests, which historically have been planted on peat, which we know is really, really bad for the environment because it emits more emissions into the atmosphere when peatlands aren't, you know, secure and they're not working properly. But what we have is a really, really strange rule in Ireland where if Quailcha then go in and clear fell a forest, the government legislation means that they have to go in automatically afterwards and replant it again. So even though we now know the damage that that is having, this rule still remains in place. So this story that I'd gone down to the Wicklow Mountains to speak about came off the back of that. That's still an issue, so we need to still keep ticking over on that and bringing new stories to the fore. And then another issue that somebody had then come to me, and this is all from building contacts with people, was about the greenways. The greenways are brilliant, but what we found from talking to ecologists was that they were putting in fences along these greenways right beside rivers and riparian zones, and we were cutting off wildlife. because the department hadn't given the different local authorities guidance on that. So that's just a really quick overview of some sort of investigations that I worked on that I thought you might be interested in. And that brings me nicely to the work that I'd done earlier on this year with DeSmog, where we looked at fat-filled milk powder. And DeSmog have been banging this drum for quite a while and seen that this was a really, really huge issue. And again, this probably comes from the milk cap being lifted. We found all this milk, Irish farmers of all this milk, what do they do with it? They're now spraying it into drums and packing it up and sending it off to West Africa. So this, I worked with DeSmog on this particular investigation, but they'd done a lot previously, and I'll let them fill you in on that because they're up next. But just to kind of finish off, I had some tips on where to start. So for me, I always think about what matters to you. You know, your stories could come from something you see in your backyard, or from being walking around the streets of your city or your town thinking that's not right. I could have a little look at that. You know, just open your eyes, look around you, and that's where you'll find the stories that really mean something to you and matter to you. And then you'll put a lot more into that work. And I mean, there are ideas absolutely everywhere. All you've got to do is turn on the TV, have a look at social media. And then from that, I would just say read everything you can. If you decide on a particular issue or a particular topic, just go and try and get as much information as you can on that. Read as much as you can, so you've got a really good grounding and a really good place to start. And back to contacts again, make and keep your contacts. And even if they're not giving you a story, meet them for a cup of tea and on time, because you're keeping that relationship open. And they're not like, oh God, I haven't heard from you in like 5 years. What are you after? You know? And then with sort of this discussions around disinformation and misinformation, I would always say with a lot of reporting these days, especially if you work in a newsroom, you're bombarded with a lot of press releases. And I would say double check everything, always read between the lines. I always had this kind of joke that when you get a press release, the good line's always buried at the end. So I would start at the end and then sort of read backwards to see what the story was. But with everything that you're seeing on social media, if you see something on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, just because it looks official doesn't mean it is. And if you see something and think, oh, that's a bit odd, it could be anything to do with, you know, we've got a lot of stuff around immigration and things like that that are going online at the moment. But it's not necessarily true. So I would go and do your homework. If you see something and think, oh, that's a bit odd, go check it out. Go look at the government statistics. Go read the actual newspaper reports, because there are a lot of people out there now just using social media to gain clicks. And, you know, sometimes even the government can spread disinformation. And we've seen that with the agricultural lobby in Ireland, which might be kind of a bit of a contentious view, but you know, they keep touting this view, which we've highlighted time and again in different stories, that Irish farming is the most sustainable when it's not. So you need to bring the evidence to the fore. And when you're questioning people like politicians, like councillors, and they throw out statements like that, question them on why they're saying that. What's their evidence? What are they backing that up with? You know, your job is to get to the facts of the case. It's not just to what people say, whether it's true or not. You've got to put that into context for the readers, because your job is to educate them. And if you're stuck on something, ask for help. Reach out to people that maybe know a little bit more about it than you do. Look for a journalist who's maybe already working in that sphere. And honestly, the environment journalists in Ireland are all absolutely lovely. We all talk to each other. We all help each other out. We chat. And there are great academics. There are great groups like Antashka who are so helpful on nearly like everything that you would ask them about. And within that, then you can make alliances, people that you can always go back to ask for help. And I would just say always dig deep, like just dig deep, and you'll get to where you need to go. And tools of the trade, you know, obviously you need a dictaphone, a camera, all the rest of it. But I would say your biggest assets would be your gut instinct, because mine's never, you know, sent me down the wrong path. And I've always, you know, relied on that to kind of keep me right on certain things. Your contacts again, and showing up, you know, being in the place where things are happening speaks volumes. And that allows you to be there with the people, to feel how they're feeling in that one particular scenario, no matter what the story is. You can never replace, you know, a couple of messages on Instagram or whatever, with actually sitting down with somebody face to face. And it helps you become a better journalist, making those relationships and actually showing up and being in front of that politician instead of sending a press release through the press office, because that gives them something to hide behind. And your biggest asset of all, determination, grit and determination. And if you've decided, I'm going to do this story and I'm going to go down this line, don't let anything ever stop you.
Thank you, Shauna. I'm not sure you can see all the applauds that are coming in. I'm sure there's going to be loads and loads of questions, and it really takes that bravery to speak truth to power. And your words are a really powerful reminder of the impact one voice has. And just a reminder to all the students here as well, like at an international level, we have had numerous young reporters be present at COP2 as reporters too. So it's definitely something you can consider. I'm going to quickly move on to Phoebe and Brigitte now, and then we will have questions at the end. Thank you so much. Over to you, Phoebe.
Great. Oh, my voice is so croaky, sorry. Yeah, that was so inspiring, Shauna. Thank you very much. I was actually taking a few notes myself from your speech, from your panel. That was really, really brilliant. So I feel like Shauna has very well covered some of the fundamental aspects of journalism, but Brigitte and I from DeSmog wanted to present a few things and go a bit deeper into some of the stories that we've worked on both together and with some of our colleagues. So just to introduce myself briefly, and then maybe Brigitte can, I'm one of the deputy editors at DeSmog, and DeSmog's a climate investigations outlet. We're a website based in the UK, and we have a team in the US and Canada, and also freelancers around the world. And we're basically a kind of climate politics site looking to kind of shine a light on the people and organizations blocking action on climate change and nature. I've been there for about 6 years, and before that I was a local newspaper reporter, and I also worked for a few nationals, including The Sun and the Evening Standard. But I'll let Brigitte introduce herself too.
Hello, so I'm Brigitte. I also work at DeSmog. I'm a researcher, mostly focused on industrial aquaculture, but I've also done a bit of agriculture things at DeSmog as well. And I've been at DeSmog for about 2.5 years. And before that, I studied natural sciences, so biology and soil biology specifically.
Great, thanks so much, Brigitte. So if we go to the next slide, we just wanted to talk a bit about what investigative journalism is, because I think it's often kind of overly mystified as this special type of journalism that only some people can do. But as I think all of us who are journalists know, it's just not true. So investigative journalism is just digging a little bit deeper than you might otherwise. And yeah, I like Brigitte's illustration here, because one hallmark of investigative journalism is often that it's quite slow, hard work, but I think it can be extremely rewarding. You can be working on things from anything from a few weeks to a few years. And the key is that it's in the public interest, that you're serving your readers, which is something that Shauna was talking about. And, shining a light on the powerful, on vested interests, on things that haven't been exposed before. So if we go to the next slide, Brigitte, thanks. Just wanted to also say a bit about what we do on a day-to-day basis as well. And that's very similar to, doesn't matter whether you're an investigative journalist or a journalist, you'll be doing these things. And a really just crucial part of it is actually talking to people, which I think Shauna highlighted really, really well. It's just like picking up the phone, speaking to people, digging deep. I think sources are very important. So a lot of our best stories have come from like a tip off, from your cousin's boyfriend's daughter, whatever, just you never know when you're going to find a story, and it could be when you're not even working at all, but you come across it and it could turn into a 2-year investigation. And other things we do, a lot of it can be desk based, but you can end up on really exciting trips. Like Shauna highlighted, Brigitte's been to Senegal to work on an investigation. I've been to one of the COPs as well, and I think there's always scope for travel as well. And yeah, if we go to the next slide, Brigitte, just to say a tiny bit about what DeSmog does, we're looking into everything from greenwashing to lobbying, misinformation, conflicts of interest. So I think yeah, we're looking deep into some of those blockers to climate action. So sometimes it's not very cheerful stuff because we're not always looking at the fantastic kind of solutions to climate change as well, but we're really trying to show what the problems are. And yeah, if you go to the next slide, Brigitte, just to say a bit about how our work is used. It's been used by politicians to call and lobby for change in school curriculum. It's routinely used by campaigners and activists to kind of promote change and underscore the need for transparency. And we're also very reliant on campaigners and activists too, to understand our stories, to find stories, and to kind of verify information. Yeah, if you could go to the next one, Brigitte, please. Yeah, so we wanted to just spotlight a few things that we've worked on. DeSmog really works on a huge range of climate environment things, including agribusiness. So we do a lot on the farming sector, and we've done stories in Brazil, in the UK, in the States. But a year or two ago, we started looking into the intensive farming sector in Ireland itself, which I thought might be of interest. And as Shauna mentions, the intensive farming lobby is not really representing all of Ireland's farmers, and actually a third of all of Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions are from agriculture, and this is kind of partly due to the milk cap lifting, which Shauna also mentioned, and dairy production has really boomed, but there seems to be a kind of a blocker on the showcasing of alternatives to this more polluting farming, which is very reliant on nitrates fertilizers. So we wanted to understand that a bit better. And one of the things that DeSmog does is we have this mapping tool, and we create these amazing maps which show all the connections between different sectors and individuals. And with a lot of help from our amazing researcher, Paul Price, who's based in Dublin, we created this massive map showing the kind of interconnected interest between the farming lobby. So we're looking at the kind of Irish Farmers Association, the ICMSA, with politicians, with the media, with trade associations. So kind of showing how some of the demands of the sector is really being kind of linked to every single area of Irish society, and that map's on our website, and happy to share the link to that later. But with Brigitte, if you could go to the next slide, Brigitte, please. This is something that Shauna mentioned as well, and one of the investigations that we did as part of this series was actually looking into what happens with Ireland's meat and dairy exports. And specifically, we zoomed in on something called fat-filled milk powder, which I think most people have probably never heard of. And I hadn't really heard of it before until we started looking into it. But it's actually the most valuable dairy export in Ireland, kind of even above butter and milk extraordinarily. So we were kind of quite interested in what is this thing that's so kind of popular abroad, and we wanted to trace where it went and how it was being marketed, basically. So yeah, I don't know if Brigitte, you might want to kind of tell us a little bit more on the next slide about how we went about investigating this.
Yeah, sure. So this is this is fat-filled milk powder. It's basically, as Phoebe said, it's a byproduct of butter and cream combined. So the byproduct is skim milk, which is dried to skim milk powder, and then it's combined with palm and coconut oil, and then it produces this fat-filled milk powder, which is mostly exported to West Africa. And to investigate the supply chain of this, so from Ireland to the different countries in West Africa, we looked at lots of trade data, which gave us the names of the companies in Ireland, and we were able to link that to the brands that were being sold in these different countries. And we had to look quite carefully at the data because, in some of the rows of data, it would tell us the brands. Some of the rows didn't show us that. So there were like thousands of rows of data to look at, and that was really interesting. And then we also looked at the misleading marketing of these of fat-filled milk powder. So firstly, we sent a Freedom of Information request, so an FOI, to the Irish Board BIA, so the Food Board, to find out how the fat-filled milk powder was being advertised and the marketing strategies of these companies. And then we also looked at social media posts to analyze what kind of language they were using online to promote this product. And we found there was quite a lot of misinformation about the health claims of these products. And we also spoke to lots of different people. We spoke to experts in health, the environment, the dairy sector, as well as farmers. And we even went to a conference, or Shauna went to a conference on milk powder and spoke to people there. And we also collaborated with people with a journal in Nigeria, and the journalist there was able to speak to consumers and campaigners there as well as farmers, so that we could get the full picture of the impacts of this product.
Thanks
Back
so
to you,
much.
Phoebe.
Do you mind just going back to the last slide, actually? Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to just like linger on that investigation for a bit longer. Yeah, I think what was very a kind of key hallmark of that investigation was that it was so collaborative. So we worked with Shauna in Ireland, a journalist called Beloved John in Nigeria, and it was that the expertise from both those journalists was absolutely crucial to being able to do this investigation well, and kind of combined with Brigitte's data skills and kind of ability to get all this information on the supply chain. But I think it was a very interesting insight into kind of what is a major export from Ireland and like what actually happens to it. So we thought it was really fascinating, and we really enjoyed kind of understanding a bit more about how it's marketed and how it seems to be kind of basically oversold as more nutritious than it actually is, crucially. So thinking a bit, so obviously a story about Ireland on the one hand, but also really an international story that just shows how these products are kind of how they're sold to other markets and how they're affecting the global south as well. But yeah, onto a very different type of story. If you go to the next slide, Brigitte, thank you. So yeah, I just thought this could be interesting. So DeSmog's actually done quite a lot of investigations on social media, and particularly looking at how like really polluting companies like BP and Shell are using social media to try and win over younger generations. And so in this example, my colleagues did a big investigation, really tracking a lot of social media accounts across different platforms in the US and outside the US, and finding and looking at basically how these really polluting companies are using a kind of really like a kind of cultural capture to kind of win over younger consumers. And they do this but often by jumping on really popular social media accounts. So in this case, perhaps we can just watch the video. If you can turn to the next slide, Brigitte, please. Can people hear that? Maybe you might need to turn your sound on, Brigitte. I'm not sure. If you unmute yourself, maybe.
Were people able to hear that?
No, you might need to reshare actually with the enabling sound.
Or I can maybe put it on, I can take off my earphones and try it maybe on volume.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, we can try that again. Sorry about that. I'll turn up my volume.
Things in the world that are more loyal than grandma. Absolutely nothing. The fuel rewards program at Shell. Well, you'll save money on gas just for making everyday purchases at places like Dunkin'. Yeah, and you'll even save money just for linking your T-Mobile account.
Loki, this program sounds big. Okay, how do I sign up?
Through the link in our bio, duh.
Yes, this is a bit of a silly example, but this person is actually a massive TikTok and Instagram star, a kind of grandfluencer who's built a brand around being our Filipino grandma, is what she calls herself, based in the US. And she was extremely popular long before kind of big oil jumped on this. So she was kind of known for her like funny kind of offbeat videos, talking to her fans about food and so on. And then Shell goes along and pays her for videos, and this is then seen by hundreds of thousands of followers. So it's just an interesting example of how big oil can spread its influence even in the kind of 2020s. But yeah, if we go to the next slide, Brigitte, please. So I'm going to pass on to Brigitte to talk about her incredible 2-year investigation.
Thank you. So this is another investigation that we published recently at DeSmog, and this was with my colleague and editor Hazel Healy. So this was published in June. We looked at the supply chain basically of farmed fish that you can buy in the UK, in UK supermarkets, and we wanted to know what they were eating. Yeah, so the background is that in Senegal, there's fish meal that is produced with small fish that could otherwise be eaten. And this fish meal is exported to different countries. And so basically the problem is that in Senegal, the fish meal production or these fish meal factories are linked to a lot of different harms, including overfishing of these small fish and women's unemployment, because women who would otherwise be processing this small fish are now no longer able to, because the fish are no longer available or they're too expensive because of competition with the factories. And it also leads to food insecurity, especially in children, because the fish is no longer available for the local population. And the most crazy thing is that it takes loads of fresh fish to make fish meal. It takes 4 to 5 kilos of perfectly edible small fish to make 1 kilo of fish meal, which is not human edible. And so all of this fish meal we know is basically all of it is exported from Senegal. And so we started our investigation knowing that information and wanting to find out where that goes and how that is linked to Europe. And we wanted to know whether European consumers are somehow involved in this supply chain. So it took us about 2 years to finish the supply chain investigation, which was very complicated because the data was often unavailable or untransparent, companies and all of that. And it's also a very complicated supply chain with many different steps. So the supply chain starts with the fish in the sea in Senegal. So that's the first image. And then the fish that is fished out of the sea is sold to these factories in Senegal, which turn fish into fish meal. The fish meal is basically all exported. And we followed the fish meal to Turkey, one of the countries that buys quite a lot of Senegalese fish meal. In Turkey, it is bought by companies that combine this fish meal with other ingredients to produce fish feed, which are like these pellets, just like any kind of pet food feed. It's like these little pellets that you would feed to the animals. And the fish feed is then fed to farmed fish in Turkey also, specifically sea bass and sea bream. And these fish are farmed in these giant cages in the sea in Turkey. These fish are then harvested and sold to different countries, including the UK, and they're bought by wholesalers in the UK or importers that repackage and process and cut these fish. And then this is sold in supermarkets in the UK. So why is sea bass so, why does it need fish meal? Is because sea bass is naturally a carnivore. So if it were living in the wild, it would eat small fish naturally. And to farm sea bass, you kind of have to replicate this diet by feeding it fish meal. So that's why fish meal goes to feed sea bass and other carnivores like salmon, but we focused on sea bass here. So this is the entire supply chain, and I'm going to talk through how we managed to get the data for each part of this supply chain to complete our investigation. So the first step was in Senegal. This is where I went to Senegal. We went to Senegal multiple times to visit the factories and talk to the people who were impacted. So the women, fish processors, the fishers, and the activists. And then to connect the fish meal to Turkey, we looked at trade data. So again, like the fat-filled milk powder investigation, there was a lot of trade data, hundreds of thousands of rows of that, which was really interesting to analyze. So there was the names of the Senegalese fish meal factories and the names of the Turkish sea bass and sea bream farmers that was in that data. To connect Turkey to the UK, we had to send in a freedom of information request in the UK, which gave us the names of the Turkish farmers and the UK wholesalers. But that was the end of the supply chain from the freedom of information request. So we could only get to the wholesalers, but we wanted to know the supermarkets. So we actually had to kind of backtrace that. We went to the supermarkets in the UK, and we looked at all the sea bass and sea bream that was sold there, and we took pictures of all the fish that we could see. And we looked at the packaging codes. And so on the next slide, I'll show you a picture of a fish with a packaging code that you can trace. And we also looked at supplier lists that are sometimes publicly available, given by the supermarkets. And part of our investigation, we also wanted to look at how the fish meal was getting to the Turkish sea bass farmers. And there we tracked some boats using boat tracking software that's available online. Much of it is free. And then we also wanted to look at one farm that was owned by this Turkish fish farm company, Kiliç Deniz. And in that, we used satellite imagery like Google Earth and Google Maps and things like that. So here, this is a picture of a sea bass in the supermarket. And there are lots of different codes that you can find on any kind of food product that you see in the supermarket. And one of the codes that are that's kind of interesting is this in this oval. That is a code that brings you back to a wholesaler. So in this case, this Aldi fish had this code, which brought us back to one of the wholesalers that we were interested in, which led us to conclude that it was from that Turkish sea bass producer buying Senegalese fish meal for their fish. And our investigation concluded that there were 5 UK supermarkets that were very closely linked to Senegalese fish meal. So these were Lidl, Co-op, Aldi, Asda, and Waitrose. That's not on here. And so yeah, that's sort of the conclusion that we got to. And oh yeah, another thing about this investigation was that, like the fat-filled milk powder one, it was also very collaborative with because it spanned multiple countries. We had people in Senegal help us, as well as journalists in Turkey, and of course in the UK, because we collaborated with The Guardian for this investigation. And there were many challenges to this investigation, as well as more generally in investigative journalism. So this is an illustration that was made when we presented our investigation at a journalism conference. So this is me and Hazel, our editor, and Lychee, my cat. And basically it summarizes the difficulties that we had. It took so long, it took 2 years. And yeah, you have to have a lot of perseverance to continue with these investigations. You have to keep staying motivated. Sometimes we felt a bit crazy, but it was worth it in the end. And we had to adapt to a lot of different changes in the investigation, because since it took 2 years, there were a lot of things that changed during that time different laws changed in Senegal regarding fish meal, and data became available or it became outdated. We had to keep updating it. And then the people we knew, our contacts who were able to give us that data, then became unavailable. We made new contacts. So yeah, a lot of things happen in 2 years. I don't know if Phoebe, you wanted to talk about the other challenges.
Yeah, thanks, Brigitte. I think we're probably running out of time, so maybe it's better to go to wrap up / go to questions. But yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. We're really happy to be invited. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. I'm not sure how many questions are in there now. I've had a few messages to say that students have to jump on to another class at 2. But let me just see. I suppose I don't know if anyone else has any questions they want to jump in with, but it's so highly complex and it's such a long journey. How do you stay, I don't know, how do you stay motivated? What are the, like, I know you discussed the challenges, but yeah, I suppose what motivates you to keep asking the difficult questions?
Did you want to take that, Brigitte?
Yeah. I guess on the CVAS investigation, which was the longest investigation we've worked on, it was hard at times, but I think just knowing that it was such a interesting investigation that would have such a big impact on people's lives in Senegal, I think that was really what kept us going. And yeah, I think it was always interesting. Like we kept finding more information even after like a year and a half. We had most of it, but there was just always more. And yeah, everyone we spoke to just gave us more interesting things that we could add to it. And I think our investigation changed a lot, like every month that we were working on it.
Yeah. And I suppose for students here, probably watching back, if you had one piece of advice to tell your younger self starting out your journalism career, what would you say to? Such a hard one.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to have a single piece of advice actually, but I mean, I would probably repeat Shauna's advice, which is follow your gut and find something you're really passionate about. Because I think if it's an interest that really, if it's an area that really interests you, then you can really uncover like tons of stories. And that's like a thread that you can keep on using for your whole career, really. I used to be in general news, and like Shauna, I've kind of shifted towards environmental news because that was a passion of mine, and we're never short of stuff to write about. Unfortunately, there's a lot in climate to write about the whole time. But I think, yeah, kind of follow your gut, keep on going, and do what you actually enjoy would be my 3 bits of advice.
And there is a question that's come in now in the Q&A, which is a really good question from Brigitte. When do you know you're finished the investigation, especially if you keep finding new stuff? Especially with online, it's like, do you keep iterating? How far do you iterate a story?
Did you want to take that, Shauna? Otherwise, I can have a stab at it.
Wow, threw me under the bus there. I don't know. God, it's a tough one because, yeah, I suppose you sort of have in your mind like a deadline. You want to get things done by a certain point, but like Brigitte said there before, talking to more people brings more interest and angles. I suppose you just have to get to a point where you think, right, this story is done, and if more comes in down the line, perhaps we can add another story and another story. And I've sort of fallen into that trap with a load of different things, like Loch Ness, like the gold mine in Greencastle, where you sort of start down a line and you can never set it down because there's always more happening. So you've just got to keep reporting on that issue over and over and over again. And it does feel like you're going back to the beginning every time when it started out. But then you look at the, the span of stories that you've done on one particular issue and you think, my God, that's a lot of work. But it's always baby steps, like you'd said in your presentation, isn't it, Phoebe? Like progress is slow, but you've got to keep going. So it's chipping away at it a little bit by a little bit. And I think you could add to that.
There's another really good question here, just to pass on, Varvara. How to get in contact with people who might be responsible for negative effect, such as big companies? And that's a really difficult one. Like, people don't want to tell you the truth. How do you get to the truth? And how do you make those connections?
Yeah, there's no easy answer to this. I'm sure Shauna and Brigitte can add a lot to this, but I mean, to be honest, one thing we wanted to talk about as well is kind of going for right of replies in stories, and which is kind of to make sure you give the opportunity to everyone involved in the story to have their say. And it's really important. It's a really important part of being fair as a journalist as well. But sometimes the companies don't want to give their side of the story. They're not getting back to you at all. And that's very frustrating, actually, because I just feel uneasy as a journalist not having that side of things. And I suppose it comes back to kind of Shauna's point of making really good contacts and also just being clear that you're not going in with an agenda as a journalist. Your actual motive is to showcase what's happening, and it may, this is giving the other side of the person mentioned or the organization mentioned an opportunity to speak in your story is something that they can use to their advantage as well. But yeah, in terms of kind of really trying to like speak to industry can be very difficult, because as soon as they hear you're an environmental journalist, or sometimes, or an activist or campaigner or whatever, they also come into these difficulties. They just like often shut off. But I think it's about being as open and fair as possible in your journalism, and showing them that you're actually interested in what they have to say. Yeah, that would be my advice. But
because I suppose one of the things as well is fairness is really, really important. Right to reply is really, really important. Having an open mind when going to a story. Don't prejudge, because these are the things that can set you off on a bad path as a journalist. Try to kind of like follow the evidence. Is another really great question here. Where would you find people to talk to or events to go to?
I feel like Shauna could give a good answer to this, but otherwise I can take it.
Sure. Am I on mute, or can you hear me?
No, you're live.
Yeah. Goodness, everywhere there are always conferences. There are always advertisements, even for little sort of, it could even to get down to like sort of grassroots community level. It could be, a new community centers holding an event, clothes swaps, things like that. It just depends on what you're interested in. So a good place to start is an internet search. If you've got a specific place in mind or a specific interest in relation to that place, just do a search and familiarize yourself with how to do Google searches properly, so you get all of those little things like your big and stuff like that. I find recently actually putting -AI at the end of a Google search brings up better results, would you believe? Because you don't get the AI trying to tell you what the crack is. So you're getting, like, it's kind of back to the way the internet used to be when you're searching for things. Facebook's another really good sort of resource to find events and things that you can report on. And again, just making contacts, watching out what's going on in your local area.
That's a great tip. The minus AI. Well, I'm also going to just plug, I have put it in the chat, but it's Climate Action Week, and just climateactionweek.ie. There is so many events and online talks as well that are happening that might just inspire an idea as well. Asking people who they recommend, yeah. Okay, I'm conscious we have gone way over time now, and everyone has given up their lunch break today, and I am so appreciative of that. Thank everyone for attending. If there's no last questions there, I think we might have to wrap it up here. But you have been so inspiring, and your work that you all do is absolutely incredible. And I think you've really inspired us all here today. And I just want to say thank you so much. Brilliant, brilliant
you.
presentations. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so
Appreciate it.
much.
And if anyone has any questions after, we're all of us on social media. Hope I'm not overstepping by speaking, but yeah, I'm on socials. If you want to ever link up or anything like that, give me a shout.
Great. Thanks, Shauna. Great. Lots of love coming in there. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.